Before William Shatner boldly went anywhere, another actor almost took the captain's chair, and what he demanded was so outrageous, so impossibly arrogant, that it changed the course of television history. From budget disasters that nearly killed the show before a single episode aired to on-set accidents that rewrote Hollywood's safety rules forever, Star Trek's journey to becoming a cultural phenomenon was anything but smooth. The path to the final frontier was paved with chaos, stubborn executives, melting prosthetics, and more than a little bit of luck. These are 20 facts about the original series that prove the most optimistic show about humanity's future was built on the messiest, behind-the-scenes drama imaginable. Strap in and set phasers to stun. This gets wild. Number 1. In 1966, Gene Roddenberry had his Captain Kirk picked out. The actor was Jack Lord, already famous for playing Felix Leiter opposite Sean Connery in Dr. No. Lord had the look, the gravitas, the screen presence. He was destined to become one of TV's most iconic detectives just a few years later in Hawaii Five-0. Roddenberry sent him the script for Star Trek. Lord read it. He loved the concept. He wanted the role of Captain Kirk. The meeting seemed like a formality at that point. But then Jack Lord opened his mouth and made a demand that ended the conversation immediately. He wanted 50% ownership of the entire Star Trek franchise, not a higher salary, not back-end profit participation, not a producer credit. Ownership. He wanted half of everything Gene Roddenberry had created, half of the show, half of the merchandising, half of any future films or spin-offs. Everything. Roddenberry stared at him in disbelief and refused without a second thought. You don't hand over half of your life's work to an actor, no matter how talented or famous they might be. Lord walked away from the negotiation. William Shatner got the call a short time later. And the rest, as they say, is history. But just imagine for a moment how radically different Star Trek would have been if one man's monstrous ego hadn't priced him completely out of the galaxy. Number 2. NBC wasn't sold on Star Trek from the beginning. In 1965, network executives sat down to watch the pilot episode that Roddenberry had poured his heart into. It was called The Cage. Thoughtful, philosophical, cerebral. Everything Roddenberry believed science fiction could be. The network watched it and hated every minute. They called it too slow, too intellectual, too weird for mainstream audiences. Captain Pike wasn't dynamic or charismatic enough to carry a series. The tone felt off. The pacing dragged. They said it just wouldn't work as a weekly show. NBC said no. The project was dead in the water. Roddenberry's vision of the future died in a screening room. But then something completely unprecedented happened in television history. For the first time ever, NBC decided to order a second pilot from the same creator for the same show. They gave Roddenberry another shot to get it right. The result was an episode called Where No Man Has Gone Before. New captain with swagger and confidence. New energy and faster pacing. And most importantly, a pointy-eared Vulcan science officer who wasn't going anywhere this time. The second pilot worked. Star Trek finally got its green light. But that second chance was the rarest exception in network television. And it came dangerously close to never happening at all. Number 3. Here's what most people don't know about that first pilot. The Cage nearly destroyed everything before Star Trek ever had a chance to succeed. The episode was supposed to be a straightforward production. 11 days of shooting. A reasonable budget that Desilu Studios could afford. Simple and clean. But nothing went according to plan. Filming dragged on for 16 exhausting days as problems mounted. Costs spiraled completely out of control as they tried to bring Roddenberry's ambitious vision to life. When the dust finally settled and the bills came in, the final cost for that single pilot episode was $615,000 for 1 hour of television that might never see the light of day. Desilu Studios, the small production company owned by Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, was already struggling financially. They were not MGM or Paramount. They didn't have unlimited resources or deep pockets. This one pilot nearly bankrupted them completely. Lucy's company was hemorrhaging money on a science fiction show that didn't even have a green light from the network yet. And when NBC initially rejected The Cage outright, all that money was simply gone. Dead investment with zero return. If the network hadn't made that unprecedented decision to order a second pilot, Desilu Productions would have collapsed under the crushing weight of a failed sci-fi experiment that nobody wanted to watch. Number 4. But even after that miraculous second pilot got approved, and NBC finally said yes, Star Trek still faced an existential threat before it could air. Network executives looked at the character of Spock and immediately saw what they considered a massive problem. The pointed ears that looked alien and unsettling, the sharply arched eyebrows that seemed menacing, the cold, emotionless delivery that felt wrong for a hero. They said Spock looked like the devil. They weren't being metaphorical or exaggerating. They literally thought he resembled Satan and would terrify religious viewers across America. NBC wanted him gone, cut from the show entirely and immediately. This wasn't a polite suggestion or a negotiating point. It was a firm demand from network executives who controlled Star Trek's fate. Gene Roddenberry refused point blank. He dug in his heels and fought tooth and nail to keep Spock on the Enterprise bridge. The character was essential to his vision of the future. When test audiences finally got to see the second pilot and responded overwhelmingly positively to Leonard Nimoy's mesmerizing performance, the network executives finally backed down. What they had seen as a dangerous PR nightmare that would tank the show, viewers immediately recognized as something unforgettable and special. Spock stayed. Star Trek had found its most iconic and beloved character. But for one terrifying moment in development, the show almost launched into the world without the logical Vulcan who would come to define the entire franchise for generations. Number 5. Now here's the crucial thing most people don't understand about that second pilot that saved Star Trek. NBC wanted it made, but they absolutely didn't want to fully fund it themselves. The network was hedging their bets and protecting their investment. That's precisely where Lucille Ball enters the story and becomes Star Trek's unlikely savior. As the head of Desilu Productions, Lucy had the authority and power to greenlight expensive projects using her own studio's money. And when NBC started getting cold feet and hesitating about committing the full budget for Roddenberry's second chance, Lucy stepped in personally and made it happen. She signed off on funding the production herself, writing checks from Desilu's dwindling accounts. Her own board members and financial advisors warned her in the strongest possible terms. Bankrolling this weird science fiction show could sink the entire studio. The genre was an enormous gamble with no guaranteed audience. Roddenberry's creative vision was expensive, unproven, and frankly bizarre. She ignored every warning and backed the project anyway because she believed in what it could become. Without Lucille Ball's willingness to bet everything on Gene Roddenberry's dream, Star Trek would have died permanently in a network filing cabinet somewhere in Los Angeles in 1965. The Queen of American comedy personally saved humanity's future. And she did it fully, knowing that her decision might cost her absolutely everything she had built. Number 6. But Lucy's gamble was far more financially dangerous than most Star Trek fans realize even today. In the 1960s, television networks operated under a brutal and exploitative business model. They only paid 80% of a show's actual production costs, not 90%, not 95%, 80% flat. The production studio was forced to absorb the remaining 20% as a pure loss on every single episode they delivered, every week without exception. Think about what that actually means. Desilu Productions wasn't just funding Star Trek out of creative passion or artistic vision. They were actively, knowingly bleeding money on every single episode that made it to air. 20% losses, week after week after week, for 3 full years of production. That's why Lucille Ball's support and commitment mattered so extraordinarily much to Star Trek's survival. She wasn't just believing in an interesting television show or supporting a creative friend. She was deliberately, willingly losing substantial money on it every single week, desperately hoping that eventual syndication deals would somehow pay off the massive debt down the road. It eventually did pay off beyond anyone's wildest imagination. But for years, Star Trek was an enormous financial black hole actively threatening to swallow and destroy the company she had built with her ex-husband. Number 7. After Star Trek finally wrapped production and limped off the air in 1969, nobody at Paramount Studios cared what happened to the props and models. The 11-foot filming model of the USS Enterprise, that had been used for nearly every single exterior shot across 3 seasons, was casually left abandoned in a dusty storage room. Studio workers literally didn't know what to do with it. At some point, someone tossed the iconic model into a trash bag like it was worthless garbage. It got moved carelessly between various warehouses as Paramount reorganized their storage facilities. The most famous starship in science fiction history was repeatedly, genuinely nearly thrown out with actual garbage. At one critical point, a random studio worker who just happened to be a passionate Star Trek fan was walking through a warehouse and recognized the model sitting forgotten in a pile of junk marked for disposal. He rescued it before it could be destroyed forever. That's the only reason the Enterprise model still exists today. These days, that exact same piece of irreplaceable television history sits protected and preserved in the Smithsonian Institution, where millions can appreciate it. But the most iconic starship ever conceived was literally one random janitor's split-second decision away from ending up crushed in a Los Angeles landfill. Let that absolutely terrifying fact sink in for a moment. Number 8. You know those futuristic data tablets that the Enterprise crew members constantly use throughout the series? The pads that looked so impossibly advanced and high-tech for a show filmed in 1966? The devices that seemed to predict tablet computers decades before they existed? They were children's toys purchased at regular stores. Specifically, they were magic slate drawing boards that you could buy at any toy store for about $5. The kind where kids draw pictures and then lift the plastic sheet to erase everything. The prop department's big innovation was taking these cheap toys, slapping a 12-volt light bulb over the front surface, and declaring the job done. That's genuinely it. No custom engineering from technical experts. No expensive fabrication creating high-tech illusions. Just a kid's toy with a light bulb taped to it and some paint. And somehow it worked perfectly. Because on a standard-definition television screen in the 1960s, absolutely no viewer at home could tell the difference between that and something genuinely futuristic. Star Trek's entire vision of humanity's technological future was built almost entirely on shoestring budgets, borrowed props, recycled sets, and a whole lot of creative problem-solving. Number 9. Gene Roddenberry successfully created an optimistic vision of the 23rd century that inspired generations. But after Star Trek got canceled and went off the air, the man himself couldn't survive the realities of the 20th century. He found himself drowning in debt as residuals dried up. Complicated legal disputes over royalties and ownership rights piled up faster than he could handle them. Lawyers sent bills that kept mounting higher. To simply stay financially afloat and keep his house, Roddenberry started quietly and secretly selling studio memos, unused script drafts, and behind-the-scenes production notes directly to passionate fans through unofficial underground channels. It wasn't public knowledge at the time. It certainly wasn't glamorous or befitting the creator of such an influential show, but those sales kept the lights on in his home and paid for the lawyers defending his interests. The visionary man who had successfully imagined a peaceful utopian future for all humanity was simultaneously struggling just to pay his legal bills and avoid bankruptcy. If you ever happen to come across an original Star Trek script page bearing Gene Roddenberry's authentic signature at a convention or memorabilia shop, there's actually a pretty decent chance that particular item directly helped fund his ongoing legal defense battles. Number 10. On screen, Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock represented the absolute perfect dramatic duo. Bold human instinct perfectly balanced against calm Vulcan logic. A friendship for the ages that defined what Star Trek meant. Chemistry that felt effortlessly natural and real. But off-screen, away from the cameras, William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy clashed constantly and bitterly during production. They fought over screen time distribution in episodes. They competed over fan mail counts. They even argued about lighting setups on the bridge. Absolutely everything became a competition between them. Shatner reportedly deeply resented how phenomenally popular Spock became with audiences, especially with young women. Nimoy gradually grew exhausted and frustrated playing second fiddle to a captain character he frequently disagreed with about creative choices. Their relationship did eventually thaw somewhat over the years after the original series ended. But during those 3 intense years of filming the original 79 episodes, They were genuinely locked in a silent war behind the scenes. The incredible chemistry that millions of viewers fell in love with was absolutely real and undeniable. But the personal tension creating that chemistry was every bit as real and just as intense. Number 11. And William Shatner's interpersonal problems with cast members definitely didn't stop with Leonard Nimoy. George Takei, who played the helmsman Sulu for 3 years, has been remarkably and brutally honest about his frustrations working with Shatner. He's publicly called Shatner dismissive of other actors, relentlessly spotlight-hungry, and consistently willing to undermine his fellow castmates just to ensure he stayed in the center of every single scene. Decades later, even after numerous conventions, cast reunions, and anniversary celebrations bringing them back together, Takei still firmly says they were absolutely never friends and never will be. Shatner has denied most of Takei's specific accusations over the years, but the coldness between the two men remains undeniable and palpable whenever they're in the same room. Two actors who traveled the fictional stars together for 3 full years still haven't managed to bridge that personal gap over 50 years later. The divide remains as vast as space itself. Number 12. By season 2, NBC network executives had a completely new demand for Roddenberry that had nothing to do with story quality. They wanted pure sex appeal to boost ratings. The Beatles were absolutely exploding across American pop culture, and sharp network executives immediately saw a golden opportunity. They directly told Roddenberry they needed a Davy Jones-type character, someone specifically designed to pull in screaming teenage girls. So the writers introduced Ensign Pavel Chekhov, played by Walter Koenig, with very deliberate calculation. He had a Beatles-style mop haircut and youthful charm carefully designed specifically to target a younger female demographic. It wasn't about plot development or character depth. It wasn't about expanding the show's philosophical themes. It was absolutely pure marketing strategy to boost ratings. But what started as a cynical network gimmick actually became something meaningful. Chekhov transformed into a genuine fan-favorite character, and eventually became a powerful Cold War-era symbol of global unity and cooperation that absolutely nobody saw coming when they first introduced the Russian navigator. Number 13. Before becoming the beloved, cranky but lovable Dr. Leonard Bones, McCoy, DeForest Kelley, genuinely wasn't sure he even wanted the part when Roddenberry offered it. He'd successfully built a solid career playing villains in popular westerns, dark, morally ambiguous characters, tough guys and outlaws. He had genuine and legitimate concerns that taking a science fiction role would completely typecast him and destroy the career he'd carefully built. Gene Roddenberry offered him the part of Dr. McCoy more than once as production ramped up. Kelley hesitated and turned it down each time, wrestling with the decision. Eventually, after much consideration, he finally took the creative risk and accepted. The result was genuinely one of the most beloved and memorable characters in the entire Star Trek franchise's history. One of the absolute finest grumpy heart of gold performances that television has ever seen. And it all happened because DeForest Kelley finally said yes to something that genuinely terrified him professionally. Number 14. James Doohan, affectionately known to millions of fans worldwide as the miracle-working Chief Engineer Montgomery Scotty, Scott was far more than just a character on the Enterprise. He was also a decorated World War II combat veteran with a genuinely heroic service record. During the D-Day invasion, Doohan bravely stormed Juno Beach alongside Canadian forces facing devastating machine gun fire. During the brutal fighting, he lost his right middle finger to enemy gunfire. The injury was permanent and obvious in person. But instead of letting it define him or limit his acting career prospects, Doohan made a conscious decision to learn how to completely hide it on screen. He mastered careful blocking during scenes. He used strategic prop placement to obscure his hand. He worked with camera operators on clever camera angles. The techniques worked so well that most fans never even noticed across 3 seasons. Behind that cheerful transporter console stood a man who had survived absolutely real battles against fascism, and he quietly brought that genuine strength and resilience to every mission the Enterprise undertook. Number 15. The City on the Edge of Forever is almost universally considered the absolute pinnacle of Star Trek's original series. It's the best episode by virtually every measure, but it was an absolute production nightmare from the very beginning. The script went through nearly a full year of rewrites, arguments, and revisions. Writer Harlan Ellison battled constantly with Roddenberry and the other writers. When filming finally started after months of delays, the schedule called for 6 standard shooting days. The episode actually took 7.5 days, blowing past the deadline. The approved budget was set at $191,000, already higher than normal. The final cost that came in was $245,000. That's over $2 million in today's inflation-adjusted dollars, making it by far the most expensive regular episode of the entire original series run. And here's perhaps the best part of the story. The set designer genuinely misheard a critical instruction from production. Roddenberry asked for runes carved into stone, meaning ancient mystical symbols. The designer heard ruins, like crumbling ancient buildings. They built completely the wrong thing based on a simple miscommunication. But when everyone saw the ruins set, it looked so atmospheric and perfect that they kept it anyway. Mistakes, spiraling money, and creative madness. And somehow it became an absolute masterpiece. Number 16. Ever wonder why those cramped maintenance corridors running through the USS Enterprise had such a specific name? The Jefferies tubes that Scotty constantly crawled through to perform repairs? They were named after Matt Jefferies, the brilliant production designer who created the visual design of the USS Enterprise itself. Think about that for a moment. Scotty crawled through maintenance tunnels named after the exact man who designed the ship that Scotty served on. It was a quiet, insider tribute that the vast majority of viewers never caught or understood. An inside joke among the production crew that honored the talented guy who made Star Trek's entire visual identity possible. And over time, those tubes became genuinely iconic elements in their own right across every Star Trek series that followed. Number 17. By Season 3, NBC had completely given up on Star Trek's potential. The show had somehow survived 2 seasons despite mediocre ratings, but the network was absolutely done investing real money in it. They slashed the per-episode budget dramatically from $190,000 down to just $178,000, a substantial cut that guaranteed quality would suffer. Then they moved Star Trek to the infamous Friday night death slot, 10 o'clock on a Friday night, precisely the time when the show's core audience demographic of young people would be absolutely anywhere except sitting at home in front of a television. It was blatant sabotage. Gene Roddenberry clearly saw what NBC was doing to his creation. He stepped down as active producer in protest, though he kept his executive producer title. The quality immediately dropped without his oversight. The ratings predictably tanked in the terrible time slot. NBC finally got exactly what they wanted all along, a perfect excuse to cancel the show, and Star Trek limped painfully to the finish line. Number 18. Here's something you would never expect in a million years. A costume from the sitcom Gilligan's Island somehow ended up appearing in Star Trek. In a 1967 episode of Gilligan's Island, called Lovey's Secret Admirer, Bob Denver wore a bizarre fairy godfather costume in a dream sequence. Yellow and green robe with an eye inside a sun emblazoned prominently on the chest. Bizarre and memorable. That exact same costume was later recycled and appeared in a Star Trek episode because Paramount owned both shows. 2 programs that literally couldn't be more different in tone or setting, sharing wardrobe because production budgets were desperately tight and studios religiously reused absolutely everything they could. If you ever spot that costume while rewatching Star Trek, you'll never be able to unsee it. The final frontier was dressed by Gilligan's Island. Number 19. Leonard Nimoy's single most iconic physical feature was actually a constant nightmare to maintain during filming. Spock's pointed ears were carefully constructed from fragile foam latex that didn't hold up well. Under the scorching intense heat of studio lights, the ears would literally start to melt and lose their shape, right off Nimoy's face in real time. Filming had to stop constantly so makeup crews could reglue and carefully reshape them. Nimoy went through dozens and dozens of pairs each season just to keep the Vulcan illusion alive for viewers. It was science fiction magic held together with literal glue and constant maintenance. And every single time you see Spock on screen looking perfectly composed, remember that his ears were probably mere minutes away from completely falling off. Number 20. Gene Roddenberry once floated a creative idea that absolutely horrified Leonard Nimoy and nearly became reality: a musical episode of Star Trek. The proposed plot involved the Enterprise encountering a mysterious alien race that only communicated through elaborate songs. The entire crew would be forced to sing to communicate with them, including the emotionally restrained Spock. Nimoy fought back against the idea immediately and forcefully. He passionately insisted that Spock's carefully cultivated calm and controlled image would be completely destroyed by bursting into song. The ridiculous idea was quickly shelved after his objections. But somewhere deep in an old Desilu filing cabinet gathering dust, a first draft treatment of the Star Trek musical episode might actually still exist, and fans still wonder what specific song logical Spock would have been forced to perform. Bonus fact: during the filming of the first season episode called The Apple, something went terribly and horrifyingly wrong on set. Stuntman Jay Jones was carefully rigged for what should have been a simple and safe explosion effect, but the explosive charge detonated far too close to his body. He was violently blown backward by the force. His costume immediately caught fire from the explosion. Within mere seconds, he was fully engulfed in flames. Crew members rushed in desperately with blankets to smother the blaze before it killed him. He survived the accident. Barely. Severe burns covered his entire body. The recovery was long and agonizing. After that terrifying incident, Star Trek and Paramount completely overhauled how they handled on-set safety protocols. New mandatory procedures, stricter oversight from safety coordinators, better protective equipment. Because beneath the colorful sets, the elaborate costumes, and the optimistic starlight, real human beings were literally risking everything, including their lives, to bring Gene Roddenberry's future to life on screen. Star Trek was never really just about traveling through space. It was fundamentally about people. Real people risking their careers on an unproven concept, hiding pain and injuries to keep working, fighting bitterly backstage while smiling for cameras, holding desperately onto something bigger than themselves. It survived outright rejection, massive egos, deliberate network sabotage, and even melting ears. And somehow, against absolutely all odds, it transformed into one of the most important and influential shows ever made in television history. Live long and prosper.